everyone, and welcome to a new video. Today's video is going to be the second installment in a series I plan on doing my channel, which consists of me recreating Barbie's outfits. I started out with Homecoming Barbie, and if you missed that video, it will be linked in the description box down below. But this time around, I'm taking on a vintage classic from the 1960s, known as Orange Blossom Barbie. Orange Blossom Barbie is also known as outfit number 987, and it was produced from 1961 to 1964. This was originally an outfit that Barbie wore, but it was later packaged as part of a bridal-themed gift set that included Skipper, Ken, Barbie, and Midge. And this time around, Midge was wearing the Orange Blossom dress and styled up as a bridesmaid. I have an original Orange Blossom Barbie outfit here. It came with the bouquet, the nylon lace overdress, and the bright yellow underdress, as well as a cute little hat, except mine had an addition of a flower that I don't think was part of the original. I also don't have the original shoes, and I obviously don't have an original doll since they're quite expensive, but I think my reproduction Midge wears it quite well. I really love this design because it really combines the two styles and silhouettes that were most common in the 60s. You have that really very full gathered overskirt, and then underneath it you have a very fitted sheath dress. And I just think the combo of the two silhouettes and being able to see the shape of the body through the nylon lace is really striking, and I was really excited to attempt it on my own. So for this project I purchased tulle, which I ended up using for the hat, and I also purchased a gold and yellowy cotton, which I used to make the sheath dress, and then this really stunning eyelet lace that I used for the overdress. I decided to film this video as a making of style video so you can see the whole process of constructing this instead of a vlog style like the previous one in this series. I'd be really curious to know which type you enjoy more and which type you would like to see in the future, because there will be more of these videos in the future. I've already done a poll of what Barbie you guys would like to see next, and Soda Shop Barbie and Plantation Barbie got top marks. They were very highly requested, so I think that's what's coming up next in this series. But I hope for now you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys at the end. Step 1 was draping the pattern, which was interesting. Barbie's dress had a single seam at the waist and a seam down the back, and that's it. So the bodice is all one piece, as is the skirt, and the skirt is shaped with gathers at the sides, allowing it to fit the hips without a side seam. And to fit the bust, the bodice is actually shaped with tucks. Yes, you heard me right, tucks, not darts. With the pattern finished, I could cut it out, which was a pretty easy task since it's just two pieces. Now I'm transferring the tuck placement onto the bodice pieces using a pencil, and for the lining I'm transferring the markings for boning channels, which are placed parallel to the tucks towards the front of the bodice. The two bones help the bodice stay up since the tucks don't hug the body the way darts do. My mock-up was very prone to collapsing down, sort of, not to the point of revealing anything, but it didn't look very good, thus the boning. The markings were connected, so I had straight lines to follow. Then I cut lengths of twill tape long enough for the boning channels. These were pinned to the wrong side of the lining. Then I matched up the markings and pinned the tucks into the outer bodice layer. Now it was time to go over to the sewing machine, where I sewed the boning casings in first. After the boning casing was stitched in, the lining had been ironed, and I pinned and sewed the tucks into that layer along with the outer layer of fabric. The tucks were ironed with the allowance facing outward. This is usually a big no-no, but that's how Barbie's dress was made, so that's what I did. Once all the tucks were ironed, I stacked the layers so the lining was under the outer layer of fabric. Then I matched up the tucks and edges and pinned the layers together around the bottom and top edges. I stitched the layers together around the bottom edge. This is almost like a basting stitch just to keep the edges together and prevent the boning from slipping out when I get to that step later on. I also stitched around the top edge, and I'm sewing a ½ inch away from the edge to form a guideline for where to turn the edge inward. But I'm making sure to jump over the boning channels instead of stitching them closed. Now I'm cutting the boning to be 2 inches shorter than the channel to allow for seam allowance, and inserting the bones into the channels. And now I'm turning the top edge inward by ½ inch using the line of stitching as a guide. Now I'm stitching 1 inch away from the top edge of the bodice. Once again, this creates a guide for where to turn the edge inward. But I won't actually be turning the edge inward until the back seam is done up, and before doing that, the waist seam needs to be sewn. You can see me pinning the bodice and skirt together here. Unfortunately, I lost the footage of me gathering the skirt, but I used small running stitches pulled taut to gather 12 inches of fabric down to 6 on either side of the skirt. The gathers begin at the tucks and end 6 inches or so away from the center back edge. After pinning, the waist seam is sewn with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I'm stitching a 1/4 inch away from the first line of stitching, and trimming just below the second line of stitching with pinking shears to prevent fraying. This was a pretty common method of finishing edges in the 1950s, or 60s, which is when our inspiration piece was made. Now I'm pinning up the center back seam, and I'm only pinning the bottom 20 or so inches, since the top of the seam will be left open to allow for zipper installation. The bottom portion of the seam was sewn with a 1-inch allowance. Then I trimmed the back edge with pinking shears and ironed the seam open. I also turned the edges where the zipper would be placed inward by a little less than 1 inch. Now I'm pinning the zipper in place with the folded edges aligned with the teeth of the zipper. It's worth mentioning that I changed the zipper later on. After doing a fitting, I realized the dress was too big, so I took it in by 2 inches and damaged the zipper in the process. I replaced it with a metal teethed one, which is more accurate to the doll's dress anyway, and sewed it in using the same method shown for this zipper. Speaking of sewing, I'm sewing around the zipper using a zipper foot and stitching as close to the folded edges of the fabric as I could. And this is the point where I turned the hem at the top edge of the bodice inward. I folded it inward on the stitch line marked earlier and pinned the ends to the tape of the zipper to neatly finish it off. The hem was sewn with whip stitches, and I tried to whip stitch through just the lining layer so stitching wouldn't be visible on the exterior of the fabric. Now you can see the metal zipper that I replaced the polyester one with, and you can also see me sewing a hook and eye closure into the very top of the center back of the garment to make getting the zipper up a little bit easier. The final steps to the dress focus on the hem. I began by turning it inward by 1 inch or so using my iron. Then I used a pencil to mark a line 6.5 inches away from the now folded bottom edge. I turned the hem up to meet that line, creating a 3.25 inch wide hem. I wanted a really wide hem for this project because the doll's dress itself has a very wide hem, plus I made mine quite long, so it was a necessity. Now for the overdress, I'm cutting out a band to go around the waist, and I'm cutting this out of the eyelet fabric. I also cut out a strip which will form the collar/strap/upper portion of the bodice. Then I pinned both these pieces onto petticoat net with the right sides facing each other. The petticoat net will be used as lining, and since it's translucent it won't mess with the opacity of the eyelet fabric, and you should, hopefully, still be able to see the yellow dress underneath it. I'm also cutting out the skirt, which is a 30-inch by 3-yard rectangle. I cut a piece of petticoat netting to be the same size, then these layers were pinned together too. For the lower portion of the bodice, I'm stitching around the top and back edges, using a 1/2 inch allowance and leaving the bottom edge open. For the strip that forms the straps, I'm stitching across the long edges and leaving the ends open. And for the skirt, I'm stitching around the back edges and hem, leaving the top edge open. You need at least one edge left open for all the pieces to allow for them to be turned right side out. Now I'm trimming the seam allowance on the strap down to 1/8 of an inch. Then the strap can be turned right side out and ironed. After ironing, I folded the strap in half with the ends even to find the center front. I marked the center front with pins, then used running stitches to densely gather the fabric at that point. Once the gathering was done, that piece was set aside, and I moved on to the lower bodice panel. I trimmed the seam allowance down on this piece as well, and also clipped the points so they would turn outward smoothly, and sharply. Then this piece was turned right side out and ironed as well. Now the center of the strap is lined up with the point on the bodice and pinned together. Then I stitched this point by hand using several whip stitches to make sure it was very secure. Then I plopped the bodice onto my dress form to help me determine the exact strap length and placement, since it was originally cut to an estimate. After roughly pinning them in place, I did a proper fitting on myself to make sure they were perfect. I top stitched the straps into position by machine as close to the top edge of the lower portion of the bodice as I could, so the stitching would be less noticeable. Then off camera, I trimmed off excess strap fabric so there was an even ½ inch seam allowance. Now I'm gathering the skirt down as densely as I possibly can, using the shove it under the presser foot as you sew method, which I like to think I invented, and it consists of shoving the fabric under the presser foot as you sew. I actually had to run the skirt through the machine several times, gathering it more densely on each pass until it matched the width of the waist of the bodice. When the skirt was finally gathered enough, I pinned it to the bodice with the right sides facing each other. It was sewn on with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, then I folded the gathers upwards so they extend just inside the waistline of the bodice, and top stitched a 1/4 inch away from the seam to further secure it in place. The last step for this whole project was sewing the hook closures into the back of the bodice, which overlapped slightly, just like the doll's dress. I paired this dress with some white Barbie-ish looking heels, along with a matching bouquet to complete the bridesmaid themed ensemble. Now let's cut to my final thoughts on this project. As far as final thoughts on this project go, they're very mixed. I think I came really close in terms of the pattern. I think the bodice and the sheath underdress is really spot on, and I think the hat's a pretty close replica too. I think I did a good job with patterning the overdress, and I would definitely use that pattern to remake this in the future. And the reason I say remake is because the fabric I used just wasn't quite spot on. I thought I'd gotten a really close match since the eyelet fabric had bands of detailing almost identical to the nylon lace that was used on her original dress. But my fabric was much thicker and a lot more opaque, so you can't see the yellow underdress through it, and it's lacking that airiness that Barbie's dress has. I've actually already purchased another lace fabric, which I think I'm going to use to remake her overdress, and hopefully then I will end up with something that looks closer, even if the lace I end up using doesn't have as clean cut of banding details like the eyelet cotton that I used for this round. I feel like it's kind of one or the other because they really just don't produce nylon laces in a variety of designs like they used to, so it's really difficult to find something that perfectly matches her dress, especially in a larger scale. But I tried my best and I'm still really happy with what I ended up with. I think it's a very cute look, and I think if I was a bridesmaid, I would fight pretty hard to wear this dress, so that has to say something. I'd love to know your thoughts on this dress, and if you'd like to see me reattempt this in the future, then definitely subscribe and stay tuned because I'm determined to get it right. I'm also determined to make many more Barbie-inspired dresses, so if you're interested in seeing that too, then you should subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, then giving it a like and a comment really helps me out in this algorithm-dominated website that we are all battling to be at the top of. And if you want to help support the channel and get early access and exclusive access to a whole bunch of videos and content, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. There'll be a link to that in the description box as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I will talk to all of you guys very soon.